What would Martin Luther King say if he were faced with the images showing Ahmaud Arbery trying to run, trying to live, trying to simply exist? Have you ever stopped to think about the weight of seeing, with your own eyes, the exact repetition of what I tried to prevent for years? A young black man running and dying in the middle of the street, with his body stretched out on the ground, blood spilling on the asphalt as if his life had less value. Can you imagine what this says to those born with dark skin? Can you feel what I felt when I saw that? Time has passed, but some things remain the same. Because you know, right? Ahmaud's death was not a mistake, it was not an accident, it was not an error. It was a reflection, a faithful reflection of what still inhabits this system. A reflection of what many still prefer to ignore. A reflection of the fear many feel when they see a black body occupying a space where it was not authorized to be. But what shakes me inside is not just the violence, it's the normalcy, the coldness with which they take someone's life and still manage to sleep. The manner in which they film, as if they own the right to document the death of a peer as proof of their own righteousness. It's this trivialization of our pain that burns me inside. Because this did not start there. It was not in Brunswick. It was not with Ahmaud, you know this. This comes from much earlier, this comes from a silence that has been too long. From a complicity that has been too well disguised. From a country that was built on the backs of black bodies, and yet still hesitates to call them human. Do you feel the indignation rising? Because I do. Because when I marched for Montgomery, when I was arrested in Birmingham, when I raised my voice in Washington and said I had a dream, it wasn't so that decades later, young black people would still have to run for their lives. Literally. I believed that justice would prevail. I believed that the laws would bring equality. But justice that does not come for all is not justice. It is privilege. And here's what takes my breath away. This is not the first time. And you know it won't be the last if nothing changes. How many names can you remember? How many have become hashtags? How many have been featured on t-shirts, posters, walls, in screams? George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, and now Ahmaud Arbery. But the most perverse thing is that these names do not always provoke reactions. These faces do not always generate emotion, because in many places, black life still needs to prove it deserves to exist. Do you understand the weight of that? Having to justify your own humanity, and don't come to me with speeches like, we don't know what really happened. Maybe he was in the wrong place. How many times will the black body be blamed for its own death? How many times will we hear that it's not quite like that it wasn't racism? Tell me, how wasn't it? He was running, unarmed, no threat, just the black body. And that was enough. What do you see when you look at Ahmaud lying on the ground? A man, a son, a brother, or a suspect? Because that's how we are taught to look. From a young age, we are taught to distrust the color, the hair, the walk, the way of dressing. We are taught that blacks are dangerous, that blacks need to be watched, that blacks don't belong. And when someone believes that strongly enough, what happened to Ahmaud happens. So then they tell you to have patience, they say to wait for justice. They say not to generalize, they say not to make noise, but I ask you, would you wait silently if it were your child, your brother, your friend, with their body on the ground? Would you accept this calm if you knew that no matter how much time passes, your skin will continue to be your first judgment? That's why I insisted so much on non-violence. Because I knew that if we used their weapons, we would become part of this sick cycle. But I also knew that silence was never an option, never will be. And if we are still talking about this, it's because the wound remains open. And there is no bandage that works without truth. Ahmaud died for nothing more than who he was. Is that enough to shock you? Because it should be. And if it doesn't shock you, then something is wrong. Very wrong. Because when indignation settles, racism grows. When apathy sets in, injustice advances. And if you watch this video and feel nothing, then something has been taken from you too. It wasn't just the police that failed. It wasn't just the judicial system that took too long to act. It was an entire society that allowed it. That hesitated. That doubted. That needed to see the video to believe. A video, as if only the image could prove what the skin has been screaming for centuries. And still, there were those who doubted. There were those who searched for justification. That says a lot about the world we are building. Can you understand what this hesitation represents? What it means for a country that only reacts when exposed, that only moves when pressured. I dreamed of a place where it wouldn't be necessary to die to be heard, but we are still far from that. Very far. But there's something you need to understand. Ahmaud's death won't be erased. It won't be forgotten, because each step he took on that run still echoes. Each step he took is a reminder that freedom hasn't fully arrived yet, that fear still follows us, and that justice only exists when it's for everyone. And make no mistake, this isn't about an isolated case. It's about a pattern. It's about a system that allows, that feeds, that sustains. It's about the structure that shapes the eyes of those who decide who lives and who dies, who runs and who falls. And if you think this doesn't concern you, then maybe you're not listening with your heart, because the pain that doesn't pierce you still tells you who you are. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to shake you, to remind you that dignity is not a concession, that life is not something earned by merit, that no one should be followed on a run for being black, that no one should die because someone felt threatened by a color. You may not have pulled the trigger, but if you choose silence, if you close your eyes, if you look away, then, in some way, you're still feeding this machine. And I didn't come here to accept that. I didn't preach, didn't get beaten, didn't go to jail, didn't face dogs and bombs to, years later, see this same violence adopt new clothes and continue alive. You want to know what Martin Luther King would say, seeing Ahmaud fallen? I would say that this country still has an immense debt to black people. I would say that it's not enough to condemn the murderers. We must confront what created them, what shaped them, what authorized them to believe they had this right. Because if the root remains, new rotten fruits will come. And you know what else? I would say that you have a choice. Now. Because watching the video is not enough. Feeling anger is not enough. Posting on social media is not enough. It's necessary to turn this indignation into action. It's necessary to break the cycle. It's necessary to educate, expose, confront, sustain the gaze, and not stop. Because the fight is not over. Because the dream is still under construction. And because as long as there's an Ahmaud who doesn't come home, none of us can rest. And when I say that none of us can rest, it's not an abstract call. I'm telling you to get up now. Because if you are waiting for the right moment to act, it has already passed. And the next one might be too late. The next one might be another name shouted in a protest, another face printed on a t-shirt, another life interrupted in the middle of the street. We can't normalize this constant mourning. We can't accept that black life keeps being a statistic, keeps being a debate, keeps being endlessly dehumanized. And the most serious thing is that it's not just about death. Death is the peak, but before it comes the crooked look, the abusive approach, the ignored resume, the silenced voice, the fear of existing freely. Before death comes systematic exclusion. Racism doesn't start when the trigger is pulled. It starts much earlier when society chooses who has the right to be seen as innocent. When it decides, based on skin color, who deserves the benefit of the doubt. That's where the poison lies. Because Ahmaud was not just killed. He was condemned before even breathing that morning air. The color of his skin already carried a sentence, and no one wanted to see that, until it was too late. And even after, how many tried to justify it, how many said he shouldn't have been there, that maybe he was doing something wrong? What do you think this says about what we still carry inside? You see, the fight against racism is not just about seeking justice when someone dies. It's about preventing it from happening again. It's about seeing the invisible. It's about hearing the silences. Because as long as racism is seen as something distant, as something that only happens in the headlines, nothing really changes. The structure that killed Ahmaud is the same structure that impedes opportunities, that reduces possibilities, that turns suspicion into a sentence. This structure feeds on your neutrality. And don't tell me this is an exaggeration. Don't tell me that things have gotten better, because getting better does not mean being right. And when the standard continues to be the death of black people for nothing, then I ask you, what exactly has improved? Improved for whom? Real change doesn't happen with laws alone. Change needs to reach the minds. It needs to invade the hearts. And above all, it needs to touch the conscience. Are you willing to be touched? I have seen what hope can do. I have seen when thousands marched beside us, even without having their skin marked by prejudice. I have seen when white hands held black hands in silence, in prayer, in revolt. And that's what still moves me. But symbolic gestures are not enough. What we need now are people willing to lose their comfort. Because fighting racism is uncomfortable. It requires renunciation. It requires listening. It requires responsibility. The justice I dreamed of is not the one that comes after the tragedy. It is the one that prevents the tragedy from happening. And this justice is only possible when each person consciously decides to abandon neutrality. Because, as I said, what worries me is not the shout of the wicked, but the silence of the good. And your silence, even if not malicious, can be complicit. Omission is one of the strongest arms of oppression. So I ask you, until when are you going to watch all this as if it doesn't concern you? Until when are you going to think that it has nothing to do with your life, your family, your world? Because the pain of a mother who loses her child to racism should be pain for all of us. The fear of a young black man seeing a patrol car approaching should be a collective discomfort. The discomfort of a black woman in a job interview, realizing that her skin color weighs more than her resume, should provoke urgency in all of us. The urgency for change. And you know, there are people who hear all this and still prefer to look away. Because looking it in the eye means admitting that there is something wrong with the structure that surrounds us. And admitting this requires courage. It requires you to face your own beliefs, your own privileges, your own silences. But there is no transformation without this internal confrontation. And if you still expect this change to come from above, from the government, from institutions, from the courts, then you still don't understand. The change needs to start within you. It needs to start now. Ahmaud Arbery was killed for running. But how many others are dying in silence? How many are fading inside every day because the world insists on saying that they are worth less? And when we talk about racism, we are not talking about a feeling. We are talking about a system, about an ancient, robust mechanism that infiltrates every space. At work, in school, in politics, in the media, in speeches, in looks, in judgments. And it will only stop spinning when we interrupt its movement with action. And yes, I continue to believe in non-violence. I continue to believe in the power of words, in the light of truth, in the power of compassion. But compassion is not passivity. Love for one's neighbor is not complacency. Peace is not the absence of conflict. True peace demands justice. True peace demands confrontation. Because the peace that is silent in the face of racism is a false peace. It is a disguise. And I never believed in disguises. The truth needs to be exposed. It needs to be unsettling. It needs to burn. Because only then does it transform. Can you understand why the image of Ahmaud haunts me? Because it is not just a tragedy. It is a symbol, a mirror, a warning. And if we do not heed this warning, then we are doomed to relive it. How many more times? How many more lives? How many mothers will have to bury their children? How many young black men will have to learn from an early age to walk carefully, to speak carefully, to exist carefully? This is not the freedom I dreamed of. This is not equality. This is fear disguised as civilization. And this fear can no longer be accepted. It needs to be dismantled, word by word, gesture by gesture. Are you willing to do that? Because change does not occur collectively if it does not begin individually. It is your stance that determines the world around you. It is your perspective that builds or destroys. It is your decision that pushes history forward or keeps it stagnant. I was called a dreamer, and I accepted that name. But not because my feet were far from the ground. I dreamed based on reality. I saw the suffering of my people. I felt it in my skin. And even so, I chose to believe. I chose to act. I chose to love. Even when I was threatened. Even when I was attacked. Even when they tried to silence my voice. Because I knew the love that transforms is the love that confronts, that resists, that does not give up. And this is what you need to remember. You are not here just to watch. You are here to be a part, to take a stand, to be a voice when silence is easy, to be present when absence is more convenient. Because if you don't choose a side, the system chooses for you, and almost always it chooses the wrong side. Ahmaud should not have died, that's obvious, but the obvious needs to be said. It needs to be repeated. It needs to be shouted. Because as long as there are those who doubt it, as long as there are those who relativize it, as long as there are those who try to explain this death as if it were a consequence of Ahmaud's choices and not racism, then we are still failing. And I already told you, failing justice is failing humanity, so stop, listen, reflect, and then stand up, move. Choose to be on the right side, not when it is comfortable, but when it is necessary. Ahmaud's memory demands it, history demands it, your conscience demands it. Can you feel the weight of this responsibility? Because it is there, in front of you, and you can't pretend you don't see it. You can no longer claim ignorance. Injustice is screaming, and it will only be silenced when the truth is louder, when courage is greater, when action is constant. The question now is no longer, what happened to Ahmaud Arbery? The question is, what are you going to do about it? At this point, you can no longer say you didn't know. You can no longer hide behind the idea that maybe it doesn't concern you. Because it does. Even if you are not the target, you live within a system that still decides who has the right to live in peace and who needs to justify every step. And if you live within it, then you also have a choice. And it is this choice that defines who you truly are. Racism against black people is not a distant problem. It is not a debate. It is not a matter of opinion. It is a reality that imposes itself with force every day on the bodies, minds, and lives of millions of people who just want to exist without fear. That's all. And they can't. Because even after all that we've seen, all that has been reported, there are still those who continue to doubt the pain. There are still those who want to justify the unjustifiable. There are still those who choose the comfort of not getting involved. But now it's up to you. How many more times will it be necessary to see a black body on the ground for you to move? How many images? How many cameras? How many screams? Until when are you going to think that it is enough not to be racist when what the world needs is people willing to be anti-racist? Because neutrality at this point has already turned into complicity. If you are still waiting for a polite way to confront a system that kills, then maybe you still don't understand what's at stake. Ahmaud was running down a street like any other. He was running because he was free, or at least he was trying to be, and he died for it. He died because someone decided that a black man running doesn't seem right. He died because, to many people, the freedom of others still seems like a threat, and this is what you need to face, without dodging, without distraction, without excuse. So now answer me. What are you going to do with this? Are you going to continue your life as if nothing happened? Are you going to close this screen and forget? Are you going to think that the problem is too big and that nothing can be done? Or will you finally understand that every small action counts, that every choice you make has consequences, that every time you stay silent, someone loses a little more of the right to be? Racism will not end on its own, and it will not wait for you to be ready. The change we need requires urgency. It requires discomfort. It requires presence. It is no use getting emotional and then stepping back. It is no use getting indignant for a few minutes and then returning to the same routine as always, with the same silences as always. Indignation that does not turn into action is just another form of abandonment. You do not need to be a hero. You do not need to know everything. But you need to decide which side you will be on. Because if someone is suffering, if someone is being killed, if someone is living in fear just for existing, then the world still is not fair. And if the world still is not fair, it is because there are too many people who are too comfortable with other people's pain. So, look around. Observe who is beside you, who is being forgotten, who does not have the privilege of being heard, and then look inside. Find within you the courage to take a stand, the courage to create space, the courage to make mistakes, learn, listen, and continue. Because this fight does not need perfection. It needs commitment. It needs perseverance. You can keep saying you are against racism. But what have you done? Where have you been? What truths have you upheld? What silences have you maintained? What have you taught? To whom have you given space? That is where your fight begins. That is where your choice stops being rhetoric and turns into action. And if you still have any doubt, if there is still any part of you that hesitates, then remember the name, Ahmaud Arbery. Remember the body on the ground. Remember the blood, the gunshots, the video. Remember the interrupted run. Remember that he was just a young black man running. And decide, once and for all, that you will no longer accept this as part of the world you live in. Decide that feeling is no longer enough. It is time to act, because feeling changes nothing. What changes is what you do with it. And now it is up to you.